COVID-19 slowed the global economy, but not the pace of climate change. Arctic sea ice again receded to record lows. Oceans kept rising and warming. Droughts, floods, landslides, and fires displaced millions. In Canada, where per capita emissions are among the world's highest, scientists continue to forecast profound effects to climate. Less snow and ice cover, more rain and longer growing seasons, but also more severe weather events and extreme heat. Like that seen this summer in British Columbia, a record-shattering heat wave that neared 50 degrees Celsius in the village of Lytton, followed by devastating wildfires. Global emissions fell 7% in 2020, but the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere continued to reach record highs, now 50% higher than before the industrial era. The last 6 years are now the 6 warmest years on record.
The whole point of tackling climate change is to protect the economy, protect the well-being of people. We've kind of reduced emissions in the most expensive way possible over the course of the pandemic. So that's not really a guide to the future.
The UN now warns that without immediate, rapid, and large-scale emissions reductions, it will be impossible to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 or even 2 degrees Celsius, the goal of the Paris Agreement. Canada is among the countries failing to meet its Paris commitments and is the only G7 country where emissions have increased since 2015. The Trudeau government has since joined 120 other countries in pledging net zero by the year 2050. The Liberals also committed Canada to an emissions cut of 40 to 45% of 2005 levels by the year 2030. The same year, the federal carbon backstop would reach $170 per ton. And the Trudeau government has pledged billions in additional spending on the green economy and pushed legislation to mandate clear and binding emission targets.
That's something we can only achieve if everyone does their part, from individual Canadians to businesses to communities and governments.
But critics say the details are lacking or not sufficient. The NDP wants a 50% cut by 2030. For Greens, the target is 60%. And both parties and the Bloc Québécois want additional federal spending to propel a faster transition from fossil fuels.
We've got a Prime Minister who's all for show. He bought a pipeline. He continues to exempt the biggest polluters. And he continues to subsidize the fossil fuel sector.
If we are seeking to position ourselves well for the future, that it involves investing in a green recovery.
We should help Western Canada and Alberta to transform its economy and maintain prosperity.
Really transforming our economy to meet the climate targets that science says we need to hit to maintain a safe climate will continued massive investments of about 2% of our GDP annually, and we haven't hit that mark yet.
The Conservative plan sticks to the original 30% goal for emission reduction and calls for individual low-carbon savings accounts and a consumer carbon price no higher than $50 per ton.
When compared to the Trudeau carbon tax, our plan is just as effective in emission reduction, but vastly superior in preserving jobs and growing the Canadian economy.
Industrial prices would be kept in line with the US and EU. And BC's policies on zero-emission vehicles, fuel standards, and renewable natural gas would apply nationwide. And Aaron O'Toole has said he agrees with the goal of reaching net zero by 2050. Most of Canada's biggest resource companies, banks, and tech firms have made similar net zero pledges. But what does net zero emissions actually mean?
One can put forward a net zero commitment that has a very low level of robustness compared to what is truly required to be transformational. We need a common framework that says, here are the key tenets of a net zero commitment.
We're talking about the national inventories for Canada, and we're talking about the emissions we're producing being equal to the emissions that we are withdrawing from the atmosphere. If you're absorbing emissions by protecting forests, but then that wildfires are destroying that forest, releasing those emissions anyway, you haven't actually done a negative emission. So when you get into that negative emissions territory, there's a big onus.
As seen this summer in British Columbia, it's not just a question of reducing emissions over the long term. It's how Canadians adapt to the changes already underway, with all the major parties pledging to spend more on climate adaptation.
The adaptation solutions aren't really in one government department. They're kind of all over, that every decision needs to start baking in considerations of how more resilience to changing climate is going to bear real benefits over time.
Regardless of what the government looks like after election night, Canada's plan for emissions and the path to net zero will soon be under global scrutiny yet again. The next United Nations Conference on Climate Change gets underway in Glasgow on October 31st.